So
Maybe if you have any time afterwards, I'd love to just catch up with you.
we should definitely. All right.
I feel like somehow at some point we should stream something like Data Nerd Unite.
Yes,
It's like when I look at
it is.
It's all a bunch of data.
Yes. I'm trying to think. There was something that they showed early on, and the voting thing, and everyone's like, I was like, this is a room full of pure nerdification. It is unadulterated nerd central.
So you've been doing
Hi,
okay?
Julia.
Rodney,
Nice to meet
you. Yes. Yeah. I just figured I'd stay for the day because I got to do the tour this afternoon. I was on the couch, like I might as well. I won't be here tomorrow though. Although it looks like a couple of interesting panels. I'm gonna be out next week. So
Yeah, it's on. I can tell already. Been saying all kinds of stuff like that.
No, opioid.
that was heavy.
The opioid conversation. That
But
was.
the way that he tied in racial bias
At the end was really
is
cute,
powerful.
but it's
That's real.
And that was
That's
real.
how things happen. That's really how. That's tough.
but again with the quirky jokes though. Then,
Yeah.
but the street people didn't care.
Right.
They
It's like,
said-
no. We're in disc. Oh wow. All right. Right. No. Got it. Awesome.
Oh, okay, great.
We're worried about them, not us. Right? Is that what you're saying? Good.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a dope one. That was.
Make you think.
Very familiar.
His kid is
We're on the
tall.
high stage. We're like 17 and 15.
Woo.
Get ready to
And I'm at the
fight.
beginning stage, 2 years old.
Oh wow. I'm in 7 and 9. Yeah. 7 and 9. Yeah. He's a character. But here's what he said the other day. He is. No, I think I'm good. We were watching a movie. We were watching a movie, and the character rolls up on a motorcycle and takes her helmet off, and it's a girl. She's like, I thought that was a boy. And my wife says, why? Because you're sexist, which is what Nikki would say. He says, no, because a higher percentage of males ride motorcycles.
And so, what was the response then?
You gotta shut up. But he said percentage, so but that's what he said. A higher percentage of males ride motorcycles. Look, I just gave him a hug. I was like, that's. I don't know if that's true, but I think it is. But yeah. But like he came back like that. He's a beast. But then he spilled milk all over the counter, so and used peanut butter, and it's a balance.
How old is he?
7.
Yeah, my 7-year-old.
Yeah, it's a balance.
Little spilled milk seems okay. Right?
It's like you good.
I trade
All
spilled milk
over
for
the floor.
statistical damage.
Yeah, he's a beast.
No, I'm not there yet. I'm just listening to trolls
There you go.
sing. Like
You'll be
every
there
day.
in 5 minutes.
I'm like, I think I know every song.
There you go. That's funny.
I'm like,
I miss that.
Right.
I don't have an excuse to go watch those movies anymore. You know, I can't be creepy old guy like in the movie like this. So like, I don't get to see them anymore.
That's got to be the worst thing that ever changed.
I fortunately missed the whole Frozen thing.
No, I didn't. I was
When it
right
big.
smack in the middle of
Big. I
that.
knew people who were like,
Tika
that
was too young. No.
No, I was
Moana,
right in there.
Trolls, and Sing. Those are the 3 things. And I'm like, no, mommy, no. And I'm like,
Heavy rotation.
those 3.
Oh yeah, I made the rookie mistake of going to the ice little frozen ice. I bought something right when we got there, like an idiot. So midway, she's like, I want more. I'm like, that was $40 what I just bought. We done for the rest of the week. Like, I was right in the middle.
I'm enjoying the princess music, so I guess she's out of it.
Yeah, she's lucky. Princesses were safer.
Insane.
Yeah, so what's the next step?
Call with Mercedes yesterday, so
Community.
Yeah.
We're probably going to do it in an open house.
we're trying to do something with her house and her place.
You're
Why you want to do
working
it?
at your own pace to digest the data,
It's in the heart.
and then we move them into the structure
Target
and
area.
get their
And a lot
feedback.
of them feel like they're not
Saturday open
friendly,
house.
like towards the community, and so we trying to bridge together.
Also looking at a couple other different ways of engaging folks, contact stuff, working with Wonder Week, maybe to figure out some book styles.
Hel- Hello, everyone. We're going to get started with our Atlanta panel in a few seconds. Yeah. I haven't looked.
TR. So I'm just like, okay. So we are waiting, Latondra responded, so we're still waiting with her. I'm gonna text her actually today to see if we can do the event at the backyard. I just think that'll be great.
Do it.
Are we waiting for me to do something? Okay. All right, I'm doing something. Welcome to the 2:15 session where we talk to a local panel of experts working on the west side of Atlanta, and they're going to explain exactly what that is when it's their turn to talk. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually have 3 jobs right now. Is number 1, as the host city at these NNIP conferences, we like to tell you a little bit about the NNIP partners work. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of what Neighborhood Nexus is and what we do. The second thing I'm going to do is give another presentation about sort of framing the equity conversation about Atlanta and beyond. And this is just sort of a way to number 1, orient you guys who aren't familiar with Atlanta, just to give you sort of a landscape of what Atlanta is. And then after that, and I'm going to do some talking for a little bit, after that we get to the interesting part of it and where we actually talk to the panelists, which I'm going to introduce very, very quickly right now, and then after I get done with my spiel, I'll introduce them more in depth. So what we have today is we have Rodney Milton. Raise your hand. We have Frank Fernandez. We have Julia Lankford and David Jackson, and we're going to hear from them in just a little bit. But now we're going to talk about Neighborhood Nexus. And so I've given a version of this presentation dozens and dozens of times to different audiences like realtors, CEOs, mayors, and I have to say I'm pretty intimidated with this audience because normally I just make stuff up. And it sounds really good, but I can't really do that with you guys. And here's like where I usually say, hey, I'm a data geek, so give me a break, but in this crowd I'm probably pretty cool. But so anywho, quick overview of Neighborhood Nexus. So Neighborhood Nexus is the NNIP partner from Atlanta, and our overarching goal, and this is going to sound similar to what you guys' overarching goals is really to create a data-driven, evidence-based decision-making culture in the Atlanta region and beyond. Right? And so what the way the Neighborhood Nexus is structured is it's a partnership with the Atlanta Regional Commission. So I'm the manager of the research group at the Atlanta Regional Commission. And part of our portfolio is to run the day-to-day operations of Neighborhood Nexus. And we do this in partnership with the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. And I think Anna's here. Say hi, Anna. She's with the Community Foundation, and they provide fiscal management, just sort of overall, gives us those connections to community organizations. And meanwhile, like I said, the ARC team does the day-to-day operations of Neighborhood Nexus. ARC, Neighborhood Nexus people, stand up or raise your hand.
Woo-hoo. Yeah.
If y'all see them later, give them a hug. They need one. And so again, our overarching goal is to create an evidence-based decision and data-driven decision-making culture, and we do that by applying a theory of change, which is going to look very familiar, similar to how you guys think about using data. And of course, the theory of change starts with data, right? We have to have lots and lots and lots of data. If you look at neighborhoodnexus.org, we've worked very hard to compile, somewhere around 6,000 distinct little pieces of data about neighborhoods, census tracts, counties, cities, legislative districts in the state. So we do have lots of data, and we do have some tools on our site. If you go to neighborhoodnexus.org, you'll see a bunch of tools that visualize this data. We're a Tableau shop, so we have lots of Tableau visualizations. And Eric is sort of our main Tableau guru, and he's really done some very, very innovative stuff with that. Yes, we're still using Weave. I don't want to hear any snickering out there about Weave. And then the final piece is, after you visualize that data, you tell stories about it. And that's really kind of where we're beginning to concentrate our focus on, is telling stories. And because that's really that sort of that turning data into information and that information into action is where we really can start seeing that happening. And so we approach this theory of change in three basic ways. Again, we have sort of our public good aspect. And that's just our website. That's neighborhoodnexus.org. That's where, any community member can jump on at any time and get just a whole host of data. Again, we have 6,000 pieces of data at a county level, at a city level, at a neighborhood level. And it's all right here, neighborhoodnexus.org. And this is just really just kind of us adhering to the basic principle that we view data as a public good. This is our mission, and this is where the community first really interacts with Neighborhood Nexus. Now, the second part is we really want to engage community organizations and community residents to promote better data literacy. And so we have this website, and we have all these tools, and we have all this data, and this is really kind of the area that our new focus area is coming, because this is the part that we don't really get a lot of funding for, is the really kind of that engagement, kind of going out, doing those data literacy trainings. That's why I was so excited yesterday with the library, the civic switchboard work that we did yesterday. That's why I was, see, Eleanor, shout out to Pittsburgh, because they actually do a very good job of promoting this data literacy and really getting people to think about data and how data can affect positive community change. So, yay, Civic Switchboard. And so on our website, we do have some data storytelling platforms where it's really just us sort of taking the data and telling interesting stories. We recently did a blog post on the opioid crisis. That's why I was really appreciated hearing it from Boston's perspective. That actually got a lot of press and a lot of play from the AJC and WSB, and that's us, looking, really just kind of doing our duty to tell stories. We also work with other, nonprofits who have a wider network of groups that they work with. So we created this map for the Junior League. Layla did that, huh? And so she kind of married the assets and some of the underlying data to really tell a story. And the Junior League looks at it and says, we don't have anything going on in the south side of the city. And so that's how sort of that, again, getting people to really think and getting organizations to really think about how to use their data. And then finally, since we don't really have a lot of capacity to do those, that data literacy training that, is very important for us to do, but we just haven't really been doing it, we do deep dive engagements. And so this is sort of that fee-for-service model, where we work one-on-one with an organization. We listen to their theory of change, we listen to their data needs, and build them some tools, and then work with them to kind of use that tool to the highest and best use, and also to tell the stories that they have. But this, again, we love these deep dive engagements, but it's these one-off sort of project-based stuff. And so some examples of that is Learn for Life. This is a kind of a collective impact model based on Strive, kind of that national network, where we have, we identified 6 indicators on a cradle to career spectrum. And collective impact models are really where Neighborhood Nexus is really trying to go, because, we do like to think about sort of these systemic challenges, and we like to look at problems as a systems problem. And these collective impact models are really a way to start tackling those systemic challenges. Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, not only are they a partner, they are also a client. And so they better be a client. So they have their impact areas that looked at 5 distinct buckets in arts and health and education, community development, nonprofit effectiveness. So we built them a dashboard to kind of look at how this is working at the 23 county area. And then we do have a lot of education-focused data and data engagements. We have a great partnership with the State Department of Education, where we get sort of neighborhood-level data about student achievement. And one of the engagements that we have is GEARS, which is Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students. It's a mouthful. Where they're looking at sort of the distribution of early education assets married to sort of community conditions. And so that's another type of engagement that we do. And so for Neighborhood Nexus, we kind of look at our world in 3 ways, applying the data-driven process to sort of the public good, and that's evidenced by our website. We have a fee-for-service model where we do that deep dive one-on-one engagement. And then finally, we're really trying to figure out ways to do better in kind of that broader community engagement data literacy training. So that is Neighborhood Nexus. And so now we will transition to the second part of this, and this is really setting up this session about equity in Atlanta. And realizing that a lot of you folks aren't from Atlanta and don't really understand the landscape, we wanted just to kind of show you what Atlanta is. And again, you're going to hear me use this systems talk again, because what we try to do is explain the system, because that just sort of helps, people kind of understand their place in that system, and whether the work that we're doing in Atlanta is reinforcing that system or is it nudging in a different place. And so when we talk about what Atlanta is and what it is and what it was and what it could be, we always like to use maps. And so here is a map. Here's another map. There's a map. Aren't y'all glad y'all traveled all this way to Atlanta? There's another map. There's a map. There's a map that the north side of the city doesn't even have enough data to show up. There's a map. There's the map. Y'all understand where this is going, right? All right. Did y'all see any similarities? God, don't make me do this again. This isn't a rhetorical question. I mean, y'all just seriously, just scream it out.
Want to give us a legend?
Who said that? Out of the room, right now.
Use the color blue on the map.
Yes, yes, thank you. All right. Hey, there you go.
Oh, she cheated.
So yeah, let's go through that again and let's actually show you what we're mapping here. And the darker the colors represents the greater concentration of the thing that we're mapping. And so you'll see that that first map was percent violent crimes. There's kind of that line moving down sort of from northwest to southeast. I intentionally used the color red. Get it, red line? Never mind. Units surveyed in poor or deteriorating condition, same map. Percent of adult population with no high school diploma, same basic patterns. 18 to 64-year-olds with a disability. Percent in poverty. Teen birth rate, there's that map that there's just not enough teen births on the north side of the city for us to even be able to show that. Households with no vehicles available. And then the percent black. And so when I first started talking about system, in my career, I've worked at ARC like 19 years, and I've made literally tens of thousands of maps. And then after, a couple years ago, I just had this epiphany. It's like, every map looks the same. Why don't I just make one map? Why am I spending all this time making all these maps if I can just make one map? And it really spoke, and what it told me is that's that sort of that look at a system that's in place in the city of Atlanta. And actually, I'll broaden it out to the region just a little bit, and the region as a whole, because if you start seeing the same thing popping up, and it doesn't matter what you're mapping, if it looks the same, that's, to me, in my mind, that's a system that's at play. And so, Big Sort, there's that book by Bill Bishop 15 years ago, talking about how we as society sort of sort ourselves not only based on race, but on class, on educational attainment, on religion, on whether our kids play soccer or not. And that's very much the case here in Atlanta. You have neighborhoods, so each dot represents a neighborhood in the city of Atlanta. And so you have a cluster of neighborhoods that are hyper-majority white. You have a cluster of neighborhoods that are hyper-majority black, and you don't have a lot in the middle. Now you see that sort of those middle dots, that really kind of represents those neighborhoods where that red line kept going through it. And so those are already beginning to sort themselves out too. And so that's kind of where we're talking about, and with these equity issues, about how do we, what do we do about this sorting? So now we're going to take a quick look back, and the reason I used that color red is because I wanted to look at that Hulk map, the infamous redlining map that was made sometime in the late 1930s, where they defined the neighborhoods as either, here are the best neighborhoods, definitely push people here. Here's some really still good neighborhoods, it's fine to live there. Here's some declining neighborhoods, those are the orange ones. Be worried about those. And then the hazardous, they actually called these neighborhoods hazardous. And those are in red. And the areas that these folks are working in is that red spot, kind of the furthest west, the red. That's the west side neighborhoods. That's where these guys are working on. And, and we could say, well, man, that was like 1930s. That was like 80 years ago. But this history still matters. If you look at those neighborhoods, those hazardous neighborhoods, about 30% of that population is still in poverty. And then you look at the other classifications, and you'll see that this history still matters. And then if you look at just the last 40 years, and this is getting back to that systems conversation, you'll see those areas in blue that are highlighted. Those are the neighborhoods that lost the most in family income since 1970. Okay? Look at the shape of that. There's the definite shape. That's why we map things, because we get to look at things visually. So these are the areas, the blue neighborhoods are the ones that lost the most in family income. The next map is the neighborhoods that gained the most in family income since 1970. And look at that shape. Right? And so again, coming back to my one map phenomena, most maps fall into two camps. You have this map here that's mostly the positive socioeconomic conditions, kind of formed by that inverse triangle. That's where a lot of those neighborhoods that gain the most income are. And that point, well, I kind of misdrew the point, but the point is kind of like here. And then you just kind of flare up into the suburbs, into Cherokee County, into Forsyth County. The second map is kind of this heart-shaped looking thing that's really kind of in the core of the county, and this is where most of the challenging socioeconomics are. And so that gives you just sort of the overview of what Atlanta is, and I know in your cities and your regions, you have similar stuff going on too. It may not be exactly the shape, it may not be the inverse triangle of the heart, but it's something similar to this. And that's sort of that systemic challenges that folks like this are trying to address. And so it's hard work. Now, part of that system that is Atlanta is that we have that we're ranked number one. We have the highest rates of income inequality in the nation. Most of you who study this stuff know that. And the reason is because Atlanta's wealthy neighborhoods are very, very, very wealthy. So I know you can't see this slide, but if you look at the ones, so this is the 95th percentile income, what it is. And you'll see Atlanta ranks 4th. The ones above us, San Francisco, San Jose, Silicon Valley, and Washington, D.C. So if I were just to say those three metro areas in isolation, San Francisco, San Jose, Washington, D.C., you would automatically think, well, that's really, really expensive places to live. Well, Atlanta's right there. So our wealthy is very wealthy, so that's why we consistently lead the nation in income inequality. And this system, this income inequality, I mean, like I said, this history matters. Because if you look at the spatial distribution of things in Metro Atlanta, you see that, we still have neighborhoods that are underwater from the mortgage crisis. And in fact, some of the neighborhoods in Clayton County, which is south of here, lead the nation in the percent of homes that are underwater. We have a housing jobs mismatch where we have a tight concentration of where low-income workers live. That's the map to the left. And and low-income jobs are everywhere. They're distributed everywhere in the region. So that just means that there's a lot of driving, especially for those low-income communities. 10 miles equals 13 years. So if you look at the distribution of health outcomes, you'll see a place up in Buckhead where the average life expectancy is 84 years. Drive 10 miles south to Bankhead, near where these folks are, life expectancy is 71 years. What's happening in that 13 miles? And now I'm going to transition into the panel. And so, we take a lot of pride into working with the partners who are actually on the ground thinking about this stuff, talking to residents about this stuff, talking to their nonprofits that they're funding about how to nudge that system. Now, we may not be able to just break it all apart and start all over again, but nudging the system is a good start. And so some of the work that we're doing, we work with Rodney and the Promise Zone, Westside Promise Zone. That's going to be a tour this afternoon. We've built him a dashboard that allows his constituents to really understand those spatial differences. Those maps that I showed you at the beginning, trust me, him, his team, and the folks that he's working with, that's embedded in their brain. Invest Atlanta is one of our economic development arms for the city of Atlanta. They're actually very interested in looking at this, and so they're using some dashboards that we built them to really understand income disparities. Westside Future Fund, you're going to hear a lot about that, but this is a data-driven way to understand the challenges that the West Side is going through, and then there's a whole basket of policies, solutions that the Westside Future Fund is working on, and Frank's going to talk about that. And there's an investment map, so it's not only are we mapping deficits, we're also trying to map assets. We're trying to look at this holistically. Laureus, they are also working on the West Side. They have a youth focus, And we built them a dashboard, and again, the same thing, to not only understand the west side as a whole, but understand how, very different neighborhoods within the west side. And so they're looking at that. And then they're also really into this data storytelling. And this is what we call a story map. A lot of you guys have used something like a story map, where we're, not only marrying the data, but also talking about, some real stories on the ground. So I'm going to transition from me talking a lot to letting these guys talk a lot. And so now I'm going to do a further introduction, a little bit more about each of our panelists. Rodney Milton is going to start us off, and he is the Assistant Director of the Neighborhood Revitalization Office in the Department of City Planning. And he's the Director of the West Side Promise Zone, so he's going to talk about his work there. His wife is a very fierce tennis player, so don't come up against her. Frank Fernandez is the Vice President of Community Development for the Blank Foundation, and he really is the leader of kind of the foundation's West Side Neighborhood Prosperity Fund, and he's really directing a lot of investments in these neighborhoods. We have Julia Lankford, who's the Atlanta Program Officer for Laureus, which I showed you a little bit of the dashboard that we built for them. I got to know Julia a long time ago at Families First, which is a very family-focused service provider here in Atlanta. And then David Jackson, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the Atlanta BeltLine Partnership. I implore you, as you're here in Atlanta, go walk the BeltLine. Get on it. Go take a look at it. We have an East Side Trail and we have a West Side Trail. Walk on both of them. See the differences. It's fascinating. And so each of these partners are either managing investments, making investments, or just creating opportunities in these West Side neighborhoods. Now, to get you an orientation of where, so you're in Midtown. Essentially, if you go on Peachtree Street towards the North Avenue MARTA station and you make a left, just keep going left and you'll hit the West Side neighborhoods. You'll see big stadiums, you'll see lots of disinvestment. It's really a fascinating area over there. So now, again, I promise to stop talking, but let me bring Rodney Milton up and let him talk to you about the West Side Promise Zone.
Depressed yet? Let's get some excitement. So again, like Mike said, I'm Rodney Milton. I'm the Assistant Director of Neighborhood Revitalization for the City of Atlanta. I want to start by saying this is exciting because I feel at home with all of you. I met NNIP in 2011, and she was beautiful, and she was promising, but I was naive. I was young. I had just started at the city, and I didn't know how to talk to her. I didn't know what I would need to engage with this beautiful thing. And so, I sent her a couple of emails, and we dated a little bit. So Mike, he showed some of the dates that we went on. We did an entire City of Atlanta indicators for all 242 neighborhoods within the city. That was great. I remember that date. It was beautiful. We did a gentrification map where we looked at, throughout the city, where were those pressures of gentrification and where were those vulnerable communities that were subject to potential displacement. Beautiful date. That was amazing. He paid for dinner. But I couldn't figure out what I would need to really marry this thing, to stay together, to be together for the long run, because that's how I feel about it. And so I think today, I figured it out. And I'm here to announce, in front of an NNIP,
Get on the knee.
I'm here to announce, I'm not gonna do that because we're live streaming. My wife would kick my butt. But I'm here to announce how we as a city want to be a better partner and to marry this thing. And part of that is because when I started, I wasn't in a position where I could engage you. Just keeping it real. I feel like I got a director part of my title now, so I can make some moves. So this is what we're trying to do. All right. So I'm gonna bring this This is people and place-based community development and how we're trying to do it in the city of Atlanta. To start with, though, the Department of City Planning set out a bold vision for how we think about the city, and it was our Atlanta design. I could spend an entire day just talking about that, but I encourage you to go to atlantadesign.com or Google it, and it'll show you what we care about, what our values are. We looked at values like equity, trying to change those maps, nature, progress, access, and ambition, and looking at the way we see ourselves. We understand the urgency around doing something about it because, like all of you, we're experiencing rapid growth and change, which is freaking a lot of people out. But then we're trying to design the city and make deliberate decisions about accommodating that growth and making sure that folks don't get displaced. And so we do the implementation of that vision through place-based strategies, through a needs assessment of what's happening in the city, and a lot of other initiatives that we're focused on in our planning and our implementation efforts. So our framework is really straightforward. What we're trying to do is develop a toolkit. Now, the tools can be applied citywide, and we've got a policy initiative, particularly around the BeltLine of inclusionary zoning. That's a tool. We've got subsidies around, so we have a housing opportunity bond. That's another tool. We have analysis, data and reporting, and sort of targeting what information we need to be bringing to bear. So a part of our toolkit is our partnership with Neighborhood Nexus. We also, from the west side, we do convening of partners and aligning them, showing that map and showing them where things connect. And then we do creative placemaking. We have a whole host of tools that wouldn't fit on this slide, so don't think that those are the only ones we have. But strategies. So you take each one of these citywide tools and then you organize them. That's just a strategy. So we've got a blight remediation strategy on the west side. The west side, as you saw on those maps, is plagued by disinvestment, an aging population, and a loss of population. And so you've got a lot of blight over there. There are any number of tools to address blight, but a strategy organizes those tools so they will be applied in a specific area at a specific time to be measured by a specific outcome, right? We then have revitalization and economic development, and then what we try to do is take that toolkit, develop those strategies, and apply them to target areas. And here you have our target areas of the West Side Promise Zone, and also University Choice Neighborhoods, which is a federal program that I'll talk about. And then we're looking at other areas where we're targeting. So potentially Grove Park, which is also on the west side, or MPUV, which is where Turner Field, when the Braves left us. We'll talk about that. And then in other areas in the city. And so quite frankly, what we try to do is try to approach that. So we get calls for revitalization strategies from a number of different ways. Elected officials will identify areas. Neighborhood residents will say, can you do something for our neighborhood? And then we get development plans. So here's our target area. West Side Promise Zone includes English Avenue, Vine City, Ashview Heights, Atlanta University Center, and portions of what's a neighborhood called Castleberry Hill. The Promise Zone is a 10-year engagement. It's a 10-year designation for this area, which means for at least 10 years, we'll be together, Neighborhood Nexus. Because we're tracking a set of goals, creating jobs, increasing economic activity, tracking educational opportunities, reducing violent crime. We're looking at expanding quality, affordable housing, and we're actually developing data to track that over a 10-year period. The West Side Promise Zone, as I said, is a 10-year designation. Doesn't come with any money, of course. But what it does is it essentially, from the federal government standpoint, they recognize we keep giving grants all over municipalities. And you know, education is giving a grant, DOJ is giving a grant, and there's no centralized way of thinking about a place-based impact. So that's what Promise Zone is, and we're trying to leverage our partnerships so that we have a tool like Neighborhood Nexus for the West Side that consistently tracks that growth, tracks that impact, allows us to see what we're doing right and what we're potentially not, what we're missing and what we're doing wrong. Now, really quick, because I know you guys love maps, this map here overlays a lot of different initiatives, and Frank, our partner at the Blank Foundation, will talk about his specific initiative, but you've got choice neighborhoods, you've got the West Side on the Rise and the West Side Future Fund, and all of it is encompassed within the West Side Promise Zone. As your municipalities may know, there is this program, Choice Neighborhoods, which is really focused around targeting redevelopment of a former public housing site. And so for us, that was University Homes, and it includes the 3 neighborhoods of Vine City, Asheville Heights, and Atlanta University Center. And their focus is housing, neighborhoods, and people. But again, all those are just names. The approaches, the data that undergirds that, it's all sort of tied together. And we spoke a little bit about this before. We didn't necessarily create this mapping process, but our partners did, and we have collectively agreed to use this platform as our way of seeing the West Side. And so we're all, as partners, we convene the United Way, we convene Atlanta Public Schools, we convene the Atlanta Housing Authority, which is just recently rebranded, so they're Atlanta Housing, Invest Atlanta, as Mike had mentioned. All of these partners sitting at the table, sitting around looking at the same map, using the same data to understand some similar challenges, and we actually are looking to align our activities. And so from the city standpoint, we look at our partners, we look at everyone at the table, and we have internal partnerships where I'm working with Public Works, where I'm working with Parks and Rec, and I'm saying, as you're developing your budget, if you're looking for infrastructure projects to try to figure out how to fund, focus on the West Side. And so we convene them on a quarterly basis to get them at the table, police, fire, all of those folks, to organize their activities around a particular place. And so with that, I love you. and I hope we have a wonderful relationship together. Thank you.
Tortured analogy aside, thank you, Rodney. We're going to bring Frank Fernandez up now, and we have a video, but I don't know, Frank, if you wanted to
Yeah, I can set it up. So I'm not sure if we're getting married, but we flirted a little bit. In the setup that Mike provided, he highlighted one important point, and I'll just reemphasize that in another one, because it really is kind of the departure point for why our foundation is here, is on the West Side, which is Atlanta has a lot of great things, but what has been increasingly become very starkly clear is that we have a inequality problem, right? We have the highest income inequality, as he said, and as you've probably seen through some of the Brookings Institution work, we also have some of the lowest economic mobility rates in the country. And that is a significant challenge. And so we're here today because our founder, Arthur Blank, who owns the Atlanta Falcons and Atlanta United, was building a new stadium a few years back and went through a whole engagement process with the city and others, and made a commitment to really invest in the neighborhoods that surround the stadium, because you cannot have something that's, if you haven't seen it, you'll see the stadium that is really iconic and in many ways represents what is great about Atlanta, next to some of the most disinvested and marginalized neighborhoods in the city. That is something that we're committed to ending. And so you guys are all data junkies, and so I thought we would switch it up a little bit, show you a video with people. And we'll get back to maps eventually, I think, but just wanted to show you this first because I think this is a good way to introduce the work.
Got to have the original people that's from this neighborhood to be involved in order to reach our people. You can't make a plan without us.
We have called English Avenue the community of broken promises, because for so many years that's what we have experienced. But I want you to know today marks a new milestone in the life of our community.
We trying to get the neighborhood to use that clinic again. We'd love to see you come up there for your health needs.
I've been here doing community health work, advocating for this community. I want to see everybody do well. I want to see everybody shine.
We have a lot of kids that go through a lot, you know. Sometimes you may not know, like you see them for the first day, you know, they all smiling and stuff, but when they leave here, they're going through a struggle.
We get a lot of referrals that on paper look like ADHD, ODD kind of behaviors, but what we're finding across schools, across districts is so much trauma. They were just evicted, their housing unstable, they've doubled up with another family and they're all in one room looking for more stable employment. There's a lot of basic needs, and until they're met, we can't possibly think that they're going to be able to come in and focus on treatment.
My goal in life, I do want to own a home. I do have adult children, and I do want to be a good role model for them. I want to also have a home that belongs to us, and no matter what, I don't have to worry about being homeless anymore because I own my own. It's mine, regardless. My legacy.
Why is it important? Keys to financial success. A budget helps.
I heard about the On the Rise Financial Center through the Westside Works program to help me bridge between living homelessly and to getting on my feet.
This is a graduate of our Westside Works culinary program, and we are actually getting a concession stand on the 300 level called West Nest. It is going to be run by the students and myself and graduates.
I have to work at West Nest. I have to. The program gave so much to me, I got to give back.
Anything starts off small, just like a seed of a tree. You see a little change, and then it catches on. It catches on a little bit more, until everything just comes into place.
You can look back and see what the community used to be and what it is now. Only thing I can do is tip my hat to everyone who stayed in the neighborhood, that everyone who fought for the neighborhood, and everyone that reached out to help bring other partners in the neighborhood to beautify and to uplift this neighborhood. We need to stay and fight. We don't need to up and leave. It's what can I do in order to help change our neighborhood? What can we do?
Starting there because I think it captures a lot of the complexity and a lot of the challenge that we're engaging with collectively in terms of the work on the West Side. You know, to me, we start off by looking at this data and a lot of great maps that are going to tell you a story, a familiar story, that a lot of that data story that Mike was talking about. And I think this captures well what that translates into on the ground and in people's lives. And I think I use the term translate intentionally because that actually is one of the things, when I describe my job, the best way to describe it is I'm a translator. And it's one of the things that is hardest to do for folks. Even, you know, when you think about Mike, for example, and I think the thing that a lot of data folks struggle with is the translation of the data for different audiences. A lot of what we do is how do we translate between and among a lot of very different worlds and get past the loss in translation and people talking past one another. And so a big focus for us is how do we use data and how do we use stories to basically capture what we're trying to grapple with, which is, or encapsulate what we're trying to capture or grapple with, which is concentrated intergenerational poverty and how it manifests itself at a neighborhood scale or granular level, and how that then connects to the systemic issues that all of you are familiar with. And so for the foundation, our role is really, or how we see our role is really as a catalyst. We use the investments that we've made over the last 4 years. So over the last 4 years, we've committed just under $40 million in philanthropic investments in these communities. So we use our money, we use the influence that our founder has. We use that same influence to leverage others to invest in these communities. And we try to do it really through important frameworks. And I'm not going to talk all about it, but I think it's at a high level important to understand, because it really does drive a lot of the work that we try to support. So one framework is this three-legged stool for community revitalization. So thinking about, most folks think of the public and private sector and public-private partnerships, which are critical. But the third leg of that is really community, because it is often missing. And if they are given any kind of role, it's really window dressing. So we try to be very intentional in making sure that all three sectors are at the table and having meaningful voice in the conversations, and that residents really are front and center in helping to shape what it is that's happening to and with and for them, right? The second one is, because this stuff is complex, in many ways we're almost trying to impose order on chaos. So how do you tackle concentrated poverty that is systemic in nature? What do you tackle first, and all that kind of fun stuff? So for us, it's about really understanding, okay, we talk about place, we talk about people. Place, really looking at the physical redevelopment, so housing, affordable housing, supportive housing, market rate housing, how they interact, office, retail, parks, infrastructure, all that. On the people side, it's education, crime and safety, civic empowerment, health, economic inclusion. And then really thinking about, for us, because our focus is primarily on the human side and what investments we make in human capital to move the needle and to create more opportunity for the residents who live there. And so I was given, I have less than 2-minute warning, so I'm going to be fast. Where we have focused initially is really on those things we heard from residents, which is they want to have access to a job that allows them to take care of themselves and their family. They want to feel safe walking down the street. And they want to feel good about where their kids go to school. And so a lot of our short-term focus has been there, while at the same time taking a longer-term view, because this is a 10 to 20-year project, not a three-year project which is the time span of building the stadium, and making sure you can't just focus on one thing, unfortunately. You really have to focus on multiple things, which is why it's so critical that you have a lot of partners, this power of many you saw on the screen earlier, working alongside you, because otherwise you don't have momentum. You're not able to sustain momentum over the long term. So a few quick highlights for us. On the job front, we've invested a lot of funding in a workforce development center and employed, at this point, over 600 Westside residents at the stadium. We've been able to employ over 500 Westside residents in different living wage jobs in construction, education, healthcare, IT, and culinary arts. And those folks who have gotten jobs have earned more than $14 million in wages for their families. Through some partnerships I can talk about during the Q&A section, we've really had a big emphasis on crime and safety, working with the Police Foundation in terms of the I Promise You Center you saw, a neighborhood security patrol, over 100 security cameras throughout the neighborhood, as well as officers moving into the community, which has translated over the last 2 years into 40% decrease in crime in our focus area. So I'm going to stop there because I already got the boot. Turn over to the next person.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. I think the projector is asleep. There it is. Okay. Great. No. Okay.
Alrighty. Okay, so good afternoon. Again, I'm Julia Lankford. I'm here with the Sport for Good Foundation USA, but I'm also located here in Atlanta. And really key before we get started is really to talk about the collective of how collective impact and partnership help inform our work. And so before Laureus even came to Atlanta, we met some key partners in the room with Mike to talk about how Neighborhood Nexus could help inform some of the key points that we want to look at. So it kind of goes back to the infamous map, or several maps that was there that had that true red line dividing. And so when we look at equity from a standpoint from sports, we want to ensure that every child has the opportunity to excel in areas of health, education, community cohesion, and income. So our mission is that we change the lives of youth and strengthen communities through the power of sport. And some people may think about like, why the power of sport? But we look at it as that has the power to unite and talk about different things when you're playing in a team sport that sometimes being in a room you may not want to talk about. So our infamous comes from the famous quote from Nelson Mandela that sports has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. And sport can create hope where there was once only despair. And so when you look at the west side of Atlanta, a lot of times when we talk about what youth need or what the adults need, and sometimes it's almost creating that path of how do I hope or how do I dream? And so we look at different aspects of helping from a youth perspective that then can help their families. So we're sport, as I said, we're sport for good. Our key areas is again, health and well-being, education, employment, and social cohesion. And so when you look at the video earlier from what Frank showed, we're looking at the Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club and some of the other data points. If kids are in an area where it's low quality of food, then how can they really be in the classroom to learn? So we really look at programs who are focusing on health and well-being from a mental and physical aspect. From an education standpoint, is more than you're just doing soccer. We want to ensure that you are providing that support from mentoring, tutoring, leadership development from the education standpoint, employment. We want to look at opportunities for older youth. We definitely look at youth voice, and one of the key things that we discovered that a lot of the youth, or older youth, were saying it was a lack of access to jobs. And so throughout, hopefully my presentation, if I don't get cut off, you will see a quick video of how we did listen to youth voice and create a job opportunities for our older youth. We want to make sure that as Laureus, we not only provide key opportunities for organizations, but we provide funding, but we want to make sure it's a social return on investment, not necessarily from a Laureus Foundation standpoint, but a social investment for the community. So when we come into a community, we want to make sure we left the community better than where they started. We want to make sure we're being helpful and not harmful. So we want to look at improving fitness, increase self-confidence, conflict resolution, reduce bullying, and reduction of youth in areas for violent crimes. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit because as we saw, again, in the maps, violent crimes in the areas that we serve in the West Side, we made sure when we look at different programs we wanted to fund, they could actually address some of those barriers. But then more than that, with our partnership with Neighborhood Nexus, we then, when you looked at Laureus dashboard, violence was one of those key things. And we can actually look at when some of the program is going on in the community, is violence increased or decreased? You know, of those petty crimes of vandalism and so forth. So it all creates the story of how data also, I like how you did the data for good, which matches sport for good, of how we can mirror that together. This is a map that look at the whole spectrum from Laureus USA where we are at. So we're not only in Atlanta, we're across the United States and we're across the globe, but our key cities is Sport for Good Atlanta, Sport for Good New Orleans. We do have a Sport for Good New York and a Sport for Good Chicago. Stay tuned, in July we'll be having a Sport for Good LA. But this is really key of how we do the power of convening and talking about how sports can impact change. So we're here, we're in Atlanta, the great city. So the key things we do in Atlanta is we do provide grants. So our grantee pool, we have 14 organizations that range from track and field to soccer to lacrosse to volleyball to tennis. and also fishing. So we do have a program called Teach a Child to Fish. But we also provide training. One of the key things from the standpoint of working with Neighborhood Nexus and how they have the partnership with the Community Foundation is looking at nonprofit development and assets. So we make sure we provide training to the organizations to make sure they're tracking information of their youth. So one key thing we did here was looking at huddles.
1, 2, 3.
Together.
4, 5, 6.
Hard work.
1, 2, 3.
Together.
4, 5, 6.
Hard work.
Today, what we will see is Huddle 4. It's our scrimmage. And at this scrimmage, we'll have the opportunity for the public and private sector to come together, our key stakeholders, of nonprofit providers, of sport-based youth development providers, to come together to talk about how do we know we're making an impact when we say we make an impact in education, health, income, and civic and social cohesion.
I really believe, honestly, in my heart, that sports really do play an intricate role in the development of children and how they interact with the world.
If you can give kids the access to play a sport, that can affect the interactions they have with peers, other kids. It can affect the way they go to school, how they work in school. It can affect them becoming professional or elite athletes.
So many people are trying to go for the same dollars, and it's a blessing to have Laureus to bring us all together in one room so that we can see how we can pool our efforts to go for more funding.
Do you find that you're not the only person out on this big ocean by yourself?
I think what's different here that we're working together on in the West Side is actually all brainstorming together and seeing how our organizations overlap and how we can leverage each other's strengths.
Obviously the funding that we're getting from Laureus has been fantastic. The training has been really unbelievable. We've been part of other group grant processes, and I haven't had this kind of all-encompassing, full organizational training and connection with the group ever, actually.
What Laureus Sports for Good is going to be doing for the West Side is making a difference to hopefully thousands of kids. We've been around for 30 plus years, and with the help of Laureus, our organization is getting to the point where we're going to be around for 30 more years.
Using sport the way we use sport can change their lives.
So that talks about like our power of convening, and then this next video will show how we listen to the power of youth voice in creating partnership to create job opportunities. So this event, Going for Gold, Getting Work Ready, we had a wonderful opportunity presented to us with Concentric to create part-time job opportunities for youth on the West Side.
It was really important for them to understand that, you know, first of all, this is not the end-all be-all, right? This is one opportunity that we hope opens the door to other opportunity. You need work experience.
This is a great event. It's really about bringing together young people. But before they have the opportunity to apply for the jobs, you want to make sure that they're ready for the work, that they understand some of the pitfalls that they could encounter, that they have great communication skills, and they know about conflict resolution.
You know, I think what they went through today, the workshops, are beneficial for all young people. Luckily, these kids got to have that exposure because, you know, it really helps them understand sort of life lessons early on.
So one of the activities I was watching was really cool. The youth are blindfolded, then they have to walk through these potential barriers, and then they find out, you know, they either lost their job or something like that, and it trains them how do you prepare and think about those kind of things when they happen to you unexpectedly.
There was one where they had a corn husk toss where they had to try to focus and get that bean bag into the hole, and that created a conversation around what happens when you don't focus.
I learned that always keep a vision, keep a positive mindset. There's never a such thing as over-planning.
Life skills that I learned today was to take leadership in my group. I went over what we learned. I listened to everybody and wrote down what we learned, and then I recited it to everybody else who wasn't in our group. I learned leadership.
We're talking about like accountability and, you know, talking about what's right, having the initiative to do what's right.
I wish I had the opportunities that are being offered today.
I hope that students not only come away with an actual job at Atlanta United games, but also that they learn that we value them, that we're dedicated to their success, and we look forward to supporting you in the future.
So those are just key things about Laureus and what we do with Community Voice, and looking at how working with not only Neighborhood Nexus, but definitely with the Blaine Foundation, of how community impact, collective impact of key organizations can help inform our work. We have some upcoming initiatives. We do like a youth leadership summit. We do a day of sport, where this also provides access and opportunity for different youth in the community to be exposed to different activities. And then we create opportunities for people to get involved. And we look at joining this key alliance is really of looking at public and private sector coming together with how data informs how we want to work with programs that look at education, that look at community cohesion, that look at health and wellness and employment. So we're very focused, and we have actually a playbook that we developed, i.e. a strategic plan that helps form each group to talk about how do we hit these strategies. I think I barely made it. Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is David Jackson. I'm with the Atlanta BeltLine, and I don't have a movie, I don't have a slide, I don't have good maps, but I'm gonna do something to get you moving, because you've been sitting down for an hour and working with the Atlanta BeltLine. We're about health and getting people active. So if you've ever heard of the New York City High Line, please stand up. Wow, I could stop there, but I won't. If you've ever heard of the Reading Viaduct in Philadelphia, please stand up. Stay standing, though. Don't sit. We got to try to get the blood flowing. How about the Bloomingdale Trail in Chicago? And the Los Angeles River, the Midway Greenway in Minneapolis, the 606 in Chicago. And if you've heard of the Atlanta BeltLine, please sit down. And if you haven't heard of it, I'm going to help you learn about it today. Please take a seat. So as I said, my name is David Jackson, and I'm Deputy Executive Director for the Atlanta BeltLine Partnership. The Atlanta BeltLine is 22 miles of trails and rails that circle downtown Manhattan, my old town, downtown Atlanta. And the goal of the Atlanta BeltLine is to connect 45 neighborhoods with these 22 miles of trails and rails in ways that the city has never been connected before. Now, there's two organizations charged with building out the BeltLine. There's Atlanta BeltLine, Inc., which is using revenue from a tax allocation district to help build it out. And then my organization, the Atlanta BeltLine Partnership. And we actually predate the Atlanta BeltLine. We're the organization that grew out of Friends of the BeltLine, which was a neighborhood, community-based effort to help what was a thesis project by a master's student at Georgia Tech to become the readaptive use of trails, of train spurs that went around the city. And this project was always envisioned to be a way to connect neighborhoods that had been historically disconnected through redlining, through segregation, through racism, through the way that many cities in the South had grown up. And so in doing that, in connecting these neighborhoods, we find that there are challenges, many of the things that Frank talked about, that have embedded disparity. When you look at, as you've been charged with, to get out and look at the East Side Trail, you see a part of town that's really vibrant. It has very wealthy citizens. It has a lot of amenities. And it's a part of town that largely was well invested in for a very, very long time. When you look at the west side of town, you see a part of town that was the historically black side of town, a side of town that has been disinvested in for a long time, and a side of town that for a long time, people didn't feel like there would be opportunity. And so as the BeltLine starts to connect these 45 neighborhoods in ways they never have before, the ability to see the disparity that exists is really, really evident. And so part of our challenge at the Atlanta BeltLine Partnership is working with the citizens in those neighborhoods, the communities in those neighborhoods, the people in those neighborhoods, to help reduce that disparity, help make connections in ways they've never been made before, and really help improve outcomes for everyone. And so data plays a big part of that, and I'll talk more about that. But at the partnership, we really work with what we call our three-legged stool as well. And our three strategies are to enable the project. The project can't be fully built out with tax dollars, so we fundraise and work with partners to get money to build in, to do the trails and the parks and some of the other equity type issues that need to be done in the communities. To engage the community, we have free fitness classes. We think it's important that these fitness classes are free so that everyone around the BeltLine, regardless of their income, can participate in the activity and the opportunity that the BeltLine brings. And to empower the residents. And that's the one that's nearest and dear to my heart, and it's the most important one, to empower the residents. We focus on helping reduce inequity and improve outcomes in the areas of affordable housing, economic opportunity, and health. And clearly, if you've read any of the papers here in Atlanta, the BeltLine is being charged with, not achieving its goal around helping for affordable housing. And it's hard because the market does what the market does. And anybody who's dabbled in real estate knows that people are always trying to move things to their highest and best use. And speculators are far quicker than city government can be in purchasing properties and getting them available for affordable housing. But with partnerships like we have on the west side and partnerships around the city, Atlanta BeltLine Inc. is working really hard to improve the numbers around that, and we're working to do that as well. And there are a lot of challenges. When you think about how educationally on the east and west side trails on the BeltLine, the outcomes for children in public schools are very different. When you think of the health outcomes that are very different, there's a lot of disparity. And we at the BeltLine Partnership are working to really get down at the community level to help empower the residents, help them get the data that they need to be able to see those disparities, and really work and be part of coming up with the solutions to make those things happen. And so how are we going to do that? Well, a good example is how we recently were able to have a grant of $500,000 from the Kaiser Permanente Foundation. They were really interested in seeing improved health outcomes on the west side. We really believe that the BeltLine lifestyle, walking to work and play, being able to get out on the trail in a safe space and go to the park and have free fitness classes and do exercises will improve outcomes. And Kaiser Permanente funded us not just to have grants to do that work, but to really have a robust community engagement strategy where we brought in indigenous neighborhoods of people to help us think about what they saw as the health outcomes in their community, what types of interventions they really felt could help address those. And so through a lot of work and using data and connecting with Neighborhood Nexus and with health providers in the community, we were able to identify things like, and we all know what they are, but having the community identify them themselves is a really important part of that journey around diabetes, around high blood pressure, and things that we know that exercise can help impact. But the community residents made it clear that they were enormously interested in seeing not-for-profits from their community that they already knew funded to help do that work. And so we created an advisory board that was made up of community residents and experts in health. And we worked with the neighborhood planning units. Those are like planning districts here in the city that are citizens-led. And we really were able to identify what organizations should apply. And then they worked with us to make sure that we made the hurdle to achieve these grants low enough that neighborhood-based associations could win. And so we've awarded 8 grants, and those grants are doing everything from healthy eating with neighborhood gardens to Girls on the Run, helping people get out and run, to cultural site tourism, where we're using a community-based organization to do tours of the West Side so that new people to the West Side can learn about the history and the rich neighborhood environment that existed there, even though the West Side to the eye may not look like the best place that you want to be. And so we're really interested in making sure that when you look at the neighborhoods on the West Side Trail, there aren't huge disparities between what's going on the East Side Trail. And you can walk around and feel it, but you need data to see it. And the maps that Mike put in are helping us identify that disparity in a way that we're able to go out, tell that story, get people in the community on the West Side engaged, but also get people from all around the city engaged. Because as Frank said, sometimes it's about communications. And when people who don't live in those neighborhoods are able to see the data around what's going on in those neighborhoods, they want to engage. And so, unlike Rodney, I haven't proposed yet, but we're in deep conversations with ARC to create a data dashboard for the BeltLine. And what we want this dashboard to do is to be able to show us data on the things that we care about, affordable housing, economic opportunity, and health, but also be able to hopefully use that data to show that the BeltLine lifestyle, that being active, that getting out and connecting with your neighbors is a way to not just feel better, it's a way to live better and prosper. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Great panel. And what we're going to do now is we're going to turn it over to, we're going to open it up for questions. I'm going to give them a softball question first to talk about how they use data and to keep it sort of data focused, and then we'll turn it up. But what you've heard, you've heard from these 4 organizations, they're taking 4 different approaches to their theories of change. You've heard a lot about job opportunities, job access. You've heard about physical health. You've heard about public education, public health. You've heard about education. You've heard about lots of different ways that they're doing it. And what we're really thrilled about is that Neighborhood Nexus can be there to support all of these efforts, because that's what we're trying to do. And that's why we always talk about that sort of that systems approach, so we can support these type of systemic efforts that they're undertaking. So the first question, before we turn it over, I think we have about 20 minutes. Is that right? I'm saying we have 20 minutes. Okay. I have 18 minutes. That's very specific. And each of y'all answer this however you want, but I want to keep the focus on data before we turn over to some hard questions that these guys are going to ask. But I just wanted to understand, again, a lot of you talked about how you use data. I want to talk about some of the challenges that you're having with using data, some of the challenges you're having working with some of the nonprofits that you're either funding or working with, and then some of the challenges that you have working with community residents and getting them to, up to speed in terms of data literacy. And then finally, if you have any strategies that you can impart to everyone, because I think everyone struggles with that data literacy. And since Rodney and I apparently just got married, I'm going to start with Rodney, my newly betrothed. Hey, you started it.
Man. I did, you're right. We'll be together forever. I would say the partners that are on the ground on the west side are all either receiving funding, engaged in grants and the like, and they all have reporting requirements, and it becomes difficult for them to both meet the reporting requirements of their funders while also trying to meet general reporting requirements for how we would understand the impact of their collective efforts. And so one of the things that we're really trying to focus on is developing some level of capacity for the nonprofits that we're working with, because they're engaged in the work and not necessarily really having the capacity to do the report out aspect of it. And we're sensitive to that, particularly at the city where we're asking, give us data, and they're saying, we're doing the work. And so I think there's an opportunity around engaging another partner that can go deeper into those nonprofits on the ground and help them help us. In terms of working with residents, I'd actually say translating some of the information is still a challenge, and helping them translate some of the information. For example, the gentrification map that we had completed, we really try to focus on making sure that you saw how that related to where you were, and any policies or advocacy around what you can do about where your community is going. So looking at community retention planning as a goal or as a policy that you could embark on to actually make change. So I would say that.
Okay,
That's good. I'll chime in a little bit. I think with Laureus, we kind of came in knowing we were funding organizations that may not have the capacity or capability to look at monitoring and evaluation or data. And so we provide that umbrella of services, but we push a little bit. So you may hear in a lot of programs, everyone says we're responsible for having a 100% graduation rate. And then they didn't realize who I was, and I was like, well, how did you do that? Did you do tutoring? You know, did you do math? And they couldn't really answer those questions. So we actually had the opportunity to help train/educate kind of organizations on, if you're saying you're making this educational impact, you actually have to be doing some things along the spectrum. And what I will say, and I'm not going to speak for the Blaine Foundation, but also working with the Westside Education Collaborative, we had started talking about how we can work together to help some of the nonprofits be able to talk about carrying the load and how they can actually achieve their goals from the education standpoint, especially those who were serving youth in schools on the West Side. So for me, I was able to piggyback off that, and that also helped inform our application process from the onset of asking those key questions. Would organizations, if they was not able, would they be prepared for the assistance that we will offer them to get to that point of looking at educational outcomes or health and wellness outcomes and so forth. And we also provide the tools, whether it's surveys and different things for those organizations to help with. Oh, and one key thing from the neighborhood residents, I'm sorry. How we also was able to achieve that goal is, if you saw the video of the huddles, with the huddles that included neighborhood residents of English Avenue, Vine City, Washington Park, as well as representatives from Atlanta Public Schools, to actual organizations who were doing the sport-based programming. And I think we helped develop some trust with residents to actually know that we wasn't coming in to try to do anything new, but we want to make sure either the programs that were providing these physical activities was doing what they said they were going to do, or we were going to provide other access points.
So I would start by saying, you're kind of hitting on a theme from earlier in terms of got to embrace the complexity. And so as you all know better than most, data can tell many stories. It's kind of complicated, it's involved, but how do you make that accessible and simplify? And so the for example that we have is thinking about, I call it the denominator problem, right? So you have lots of great maps, that we work closely with Mike and his team on the Future Fund, one of our partners, that whole data dashboard. And that gives you a lot of data about what's happening in a particular neighborhood, which is what we're focused on. But really what we're measuring there is a box. And what goes in and out of that box is kind of the data that we track doesn't really get us to that. And so we can see great improvements in crime and income and so on. And we're like, hey, we're doing something great. No, it's just a different denominator, right? And so part of the challenge, I think, from data is kind of teasing that out, and what do you do with it, right? So how do you measure both what's happening at that neighborhood level, but then also what's happening to the people there? Because people are not static, they don't stay, they move, and they kind of move around. And so we care about what are the legacy residents that are there and what's happening in their lives. And so that makes it a little harder, but that's one of the challenges that we see very clearly. Another one is, this whole kind of question of correlation and causation and what you can tie your investments or interventions or activities to. So we can look at crime, right? Because that's a generally easy one to get on in real time at a very detailed, address level. But how much of that 40% reduction in crime is tied to the 4 or 5 interventions we funded or not? I don't know. And then for other areas, it can be more attenuated in that we think about health interventions we support, right? So we have a parent as teachers program we support a diabetes prevention program, all these different things. And we can track at a programmatic level what the things that we put in our grant agreements, right, in terms of the outputs and outcomes. But then how that feeds up into this higher level, okay, how has it improved, measured by decreased diabetes rates, the mortality rate going up, kind of you saw the stat. Those connections are harder to do. And so some of it for us is how do we start layering in from a data perspective these different levels of analysis in terms of the neighborhood condition report, which is that community dashboard, and then what the data we track and have for all of our partners in terms of those programmatic outputs and incomes, which are intermediate, that ultimately hopefully have an impact on those neighborhood level ones. So those are some of the things, and I would also keep emphasizing, like in terms of and this is a point with the dashboard that we worked on, and it was my point that I hammered home, is if you really want to democratize the data, you have to make this as user-friendly as possible. And the challenge is that most of the folks in this room don't think like most folks, lay people, right, in terms of how they look at the data. And so needing to put more emphasis and more time and money, in all honesty, towards addressing that translation issue.
So the BeltLine partnership, one of the challenges around data is, as I mentioned, we touch 45 neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods exist at a level sub-census tracts. ARC's done a great job by creating neighborhood statistical zones for us to get data for, but sometimes we need data even smaller than that. And so when you go talk to a community, as we encountered when we worked on our West Side community health grants, some communities are just tired of being surveyed, right? They've seen people come take their data enough. And they say, well, who owns this data? What do they do with this data? How many times do I have to answer these survey questions? And so if you really want to be responsive and connected to community and democratize the data the way Frank just talked about, you have to find a way, and we've worked to do this and don't have the perfect answer on it yet, to have the community own their data. And part of owning their data is then understanding how to use it and how to engage in it. And so it's an ongoing battle. We're not perfect in it, but I can say with our West Side Community Health Grants, the community got to create that leadership group that even started to think about policies for how people could engage their neighborhoods for data. And we're actually right now planning a meeting to report back out on them on where we are in this grant process in the data. So it's really democratizing it, giving it to them to own, and having the community help define how it gets used.
Thank you. Now we're just going to open up for some questions, so raise your hand, and we have some mics moving around. Yes, sir, please state your name and
Hi,
ask
Dominic
away.
from Phoenix. Thank you, panel, for sharing the wonderful work you're doing here in Atlanta. I have a follow-up for Rodney. You had mentioned you're looking for organizations to kind of be an intermediary for the groups on the ground that are doing the work to help them reporting. You should definitely look into working with LIST. They're new here in Atlanta, opening some financial opportunity centers, and that's what they do, is help support organizations. So I can talk to you offline if you would like. My question is, I saw on your slide you were working with the Junior League with looking out and tracking data. I would like to know what that relationship looked like, what they were looking out, looking into tracking data, for their goals, and then also, were there any other organizations that you worked with for going out and tracking the data as well?
So that's a question for me. So yeah, the Junior League was one of those, we've been talking with them a long time, and again, I go back to the marriage analogy. We've just sort of been flirting with each other for a long time, and then we just decided to say, okay, let's try a proof of concept out. We were trying some new tools. We were trying some new technologies. And what they really were looking at, one of their big focuses actually is on sex trafficking. And so they really wanted to see the organizations they had in Atlanta that they refer people to, that they work with, and then just to get an understanding of just the spatial layout of the city in terms of not only where prostitution crimes are happening, for example, but also where some of those socioeconomic conditions, how they're distributed. Because the Junior League never really looked at it that way. And so that's just one example. There's lots of different examples of ways that we've engaged with community partners in that way. So.
Good afternoon. My name is James Neal. I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm with the Institute for Museum and Library Services. Mike, you began your presentation by giving kudos to Civic Switchboard. I'm the program officer shepherding that grant through the IMLS. I wanted to know, in Atlanta, what outreach has been done to the library system. The Civic Switchboard is unique in that it incorporates an academic library, a public library, and a data intermediary. What's the outlook for library involvement in data literacy and civic data engagement in Atlanta?
Supposed to be questions for these guys, but I'll answer this one real quick too. We're very hopeful. So we haven't really had a lot of discussions with the university libraries, with, the public library systems. And we've been working with like a GSU, Georgia State University. That's been, a good friend of ours for a long, long time. And it really wasn't until we started really thinking about this civic switchboard kind of model, of how they do it in Pittsburgh. And, me and the librarian from GSU, both these light bulbs were just going off like crazy. So I don't have a good definition of what that engagement's going to look like. I just think it's going to be magical.
We have 5 more minutes or time for
Questions for the panel.
one more question.
Thank you. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. A question maybe for the local, more institutional partners that have been around longer on the scene too. So the really insightful geographic disparity, institutional racism analysis that's informed this really data-driven perspective on the geographic disparities. That's really informed a lot of articulate, maybe a relocation or a focus on where programs should do more work to make up for that gap in some ways, right? But can you say more about how maybe it's prompted, that same data analysis has prompted an internal reflection on how the organizations have operated so far, and maybe thinking about reframing the way that the organizations themselves work or are structured?
So I just want to make sure I understand your question, right? So is what you're asking us, because of really digging more deeply and how we think about and use data, is that caused us to reflect on terms of just our whole orientation? So I'll give you the blunt, honest answer, because I think this would probably be true for at least the larger institutions, is that it just depends, because larger institutions are not uniform. So kind of to Rodney's point, he may be a data nerd, but I can tell you some of the other departments are not. And that's just the reality of how this stuff works, which is why it's so important to kind of, that translation issue from my perspective is so important. So, for the foundation, we do have that orientation in terms of just having data evaluation and so on. But that doesn't always translate as having a conversation earlier. We don't always do evaluations of all our projects either, right? And some of that's political, some of that's just funding and so on. So I think, I'm not giving you a great answer, but I'm giving you, I think, an honest answer in terms of, I don't know how institutionalized that gets beyond, and that's a harder thing, in all honesty.
I think I'll take a crack at this really quickly. So, and I believe in either 2015 or 2016, our commissioner of planning, Tim Keene, came into the city and reorganized our department. We went from having 3 offices that focused on Office of Planning, Office of Housing, and Office of Buildings into 5 offices. And they expanded the capacity and focus of one of the offices, Office of Housing, to include community development. And in that, they created a division called Neighborhood Revitalization. And that's actually the division that I lead. And the goal behind that was, if you were to do a place-based strategy, and the Westside Future Fund or the Blank Foundation is leading a lot of on-the-ground work, who at the city are you talking to that can then coordinate efforts around the rest of the departments that don't speak that language? So from an institutional perspective, prior to that reorg, there was really nobody. It would rely on Frank's charm and height to say, I'm a short person, so to say, hey, Public Works, what's going on? Are you doing an infrastructure project on this street? Because this is in my neighborhood, it'd be great, we're focused on that. And then he'd call on Tuesday, hey, Parks and Rec, what's going on with Cook Park? Can you tell me? And so that's how he would have probably had to engage the city. Now we're trying to reorg so that he can, at least, if he doesn't directly reach out to the mayor, call me and I can have relationships internally to coordinate among our internal departments to say, everybody on the city side, here is the focus of our efforts. What are you doing in this space? Public Works, you're doing a resurfacing. Let's look at the map and see where that is and try to time those activities. And I think from an organization standpoint, an institutional standpoint, that's the way the city has tried to address a place-based strategy initiative to deal with those sort of equitable issues. Because there is always, all parts of the city have the opportunity to get funding and attention. So I don't want to say, if you're not in the West Side, you're out of luck. But organizing that around a particular place and prioritizing a lot of the efforts is institutionally how we're trying to go about that.
Okay, can we all give a big round of applause for our panel one more time? I think we're officially at a break, but I'll let Kathy say that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for taking the time to share this with us this afternoon. This is great, and I think lots of us will take it back to our own cities. We are breaking now to regroup. The buses will leave at 4:30 with or without you, and so be on time. And if you need to check in, also go do that first. And the hotel is sold out tonight, and we've had some challenges. So if you do not get a room, please email me or grab one of us. So we just want to get a sense of if there's room problems tonight with getting a room in the hotel. So.
And all the tours are first come, first serve. So if there's one you absolutely want to be on, I would show up early.
Thank you very much. Thanks for a great first day.
So we're going to be, continue the conversation.